Superman. Oh, John. Oh, Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad. Hi. I'm not home right now, but if you want to leave a message, just start talking at the sound of the tone.
Memories of a Vinyl Junkie, 1982. Okay. 82. Post-punk. Punk was still happening. New wave. As I put these videos together, they're obviously bookmarked by albums that came out each of these years. That's what 1982 Memories of a Vinyl Junkie is all about. My experience with these records when they came out, most of the time I got these records as they came out. Occasionally I would get them later. I started out 27-year-old. August I would turn 28. It was an interesting year. Actually, it was a pretty fabulous year because mid-year is when my book, The Beatles, England, was published, and we had a book party, and I'll get into that later on. I had a friend, a woman named Jennifer, who somehow thought this was a good idea and introduced me to a woman named Kathy. Not to be confused with Catherine, who was someone I dated when I was much younger, and probably if you go back to the 1974 video, my love for Catherine was expressed there and showcased there a little bit. But Kathy, probably of the long-term relationships that I've had, she was the most opposite of me. She was my age, a year older maybe, around the same age, but from a whole different, the opposite. I mean, she drove a Datsun 280Z, which is a real sporty car. She was all dressed up, and she was really into, she was a fashionista. And although I like style, and I've always been attracted to style, and probably wore a lot of black then as I am here today, she was really coiffed, and in the 80s coiffed, and you'll see later during our book party there's some pictures of us, short blonde hair, the big shoulder pads. I mean, we all kind of got into that look. She was beautiful, and we had a relationship that lasted about a year and a half, and sometimes it was delightful, and sometimes it was extremely tempestuous, and I've never really experience a relationship quite like that. Pretty much everything I'd been into, the 60s and 70s, a lot of the bands I stuck with. I didn't go through just phases and genres of whatever was cool and hip, although I did get into the whole new wave punk movement. As I said in some of my videos, depending on what order you're watching these in, you might have heard, in San Francisco there was this whole scene of south of Market, which was punk and new wave and post-punk and the art crowd and industrial. And there was a lot of great music coming out of San Francisco and coming through San Francisco, some of which I will talk about because some of the bands I don't have on record now, but I would go see them at the live clubs, the indie clubs, the post-punk, the clubs that would last. San Francisco was not unlike a lot of other cities where clubs would pop up and then disappear at the same time that were semi-illegal. And there was a single I picked up, an indie single, that really changed things for me and shook things up, and I just fell in love with it. And that's this independent single by Laurie Anderson, Oh Superman, backed with Walk the Dog. This just blew me away. I heard this and I just fell in love with this. It was so different. Irony was this hit number 2 in the UK. I don't think it really even charted in the United States. You UK fans are really check out different kinds of things. I mean, we get novelty songs too. In a way, some would call that a novelty song, but it was a very popular song, at least in the UK chart-wise. Subsequent to that, Warner Brothers signs her in 1982. Her debut album, Big Science, comes out. I went to see her on several of her tours. Avant-garde artists from New York, performance artist. She used a violin instead of the cat hair and on the bow of the violin. It was strung with audio tape, and she had recording heads, playback heads actually, over her violin. And so she would do these tape loop type things and go back and forth, and amazing multimedia image shows. So she kind of set it up for me of a lot of out there music that I would be into this year and subsequent years and all my life. A whole, mixing with performance spaces, galleries, museums, modern art museums, and the like. Later, obviously, she would go on in her last 10, 15 years married to Lou Reed. But this is a fantastic album. Now, I'm going to show this album next because it's completely another woman and the completely opposite end of the spectrum, and probably the only song that I am in love with, the only that was produced theoretically by Phil Collins, and that is Frida. Something's Going On. Frida, a member of ABBA from Sweden. This is her solo album, produced by Phil Collins and assisted by Hugh Padgham. I have a feeling Hugh was more of the key here. And that song, I Know There's Something Going On, a song by Russ Ballard, written by Russ Ballard, is a fantastic single, fantastic record. And I'm gonna try to play it at the very tail end of this video because it's one of those fantastic records when you hear it. It's so 80s. It has that magnificent drum sound that Phil Collins would be popular on his records in the 1980s. But that's why the bookend, in a way, of this Laurie Anderson's Frida album are completely different. This is slick, this is pop music at its best and its finest, in my opinion. And of course, there are a lot of kind of produced records. Production was really big as it started out in the 70s, but a great comeback, which was a huge hit and a very sexy hit, was Marvin Gaye's Sexual Healing. This is a tremendous record. Midnight Love on Columbia Records, beautiful record, sexy. It's sexier, like obviously Let's Get It On, not as politically social as some of his 70s records, but this was a pretty big hit record. Love this record. I was working at the time for an audio-visual company, and I didn't really like it. I would do conventions, I would set up slide projectors, sound systems. Moscone Center had just opened in San Francisco, and it was the big convention center, the Civic Auditorium. I would do things at all the hotels, and that was kind of the job I was doing for a few years. And I felt it wasn't creative enough for me or artistic for me, but I was doing fine. I was going to the shows a lot. This record, Prince's 1999, Little Red Corvette, 1999, Delirious, Let's Pretend We're Married. What a great single, a great album, excuse me. Little Red Corvette, of course, is a fantastic record. You all know this record, but another important record of 1982. I'm gonna go in and out of some groups that were sort of continuing and holding on and putting out some, in my experience or my opinion, some mediocre records. And of course, there's The Who. It's Hard by The Who. I think this is possibly, aside from their comeback records in the last decade or 15 years, I think this is probably my least favorite of their record. Don't like it. It's her 80s thing. But on the other side of the spectrum, Pete Townshend's solo record, as far as I'm concerned, that came out that year, is a magnificent, wonderful record. All the best cowboys have Chinese eyes. Love this photograph, love this cover. It's so 80s. It's such a beautifully produced record. It kind of, The Sea Refuses No River. I mean, it's kind of coming out of the stuff he was doing in the late 70s with Ronnie Lane. North Country Girls, a great song. In fact, that might have been co-written. But Stop Hurting People, the opening song on this with the sort of the vocal diatribe, almost like the sing talk, where he's talking in the intro. It's just, I would play that song over and over again. And of course, Faith Dances Part 2, Somebody Save Me, Prelude, Uniforms. Really good communication. I think every track on this is a good record. Continuing on, a record I did get because of one song. There's a song on this record called Did She Jump or Was She Pushed? And I had seen them, they were going through a tempestuous time. Richard Thompson and Linda Thompson. They made great records together. And Richard Thompson, of course, from Fairport Convention, great guitar player, great songwriter. As much as I like his solo records, I prefer them when they're together because I get a little tired of Richard's voice. But when they go back and forth with Linda and Richard, of course, they had a great, they have a son named Teddy Thompson, who's a great performer in his own right. This is a fabulous album, Shoot Out the Lights. Is it a breakup record? Probably. Fantastic record. I think this is the best record they did together. There was a guy I remember going once, driving to, and his name was Randy. I don't say his last name in case he's out there in the world. I don't know where he is. Irish guy, one of the most smartest guys I've ever met. And he had the cliche of an Irish drinking problem, but he would get crazy and wacko. But I loved him. He could cite poetry, every sort of Irish writer book. He was into the whole Beat generation, the Beat poets of Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. And him and I once went on a drive to San Diego for this audiovisual company we worked for. And we had this brown van, and we drove from San Francisco to San Diego with all this audiovisual equipment. And we were going to be there for a 3-day audiovisual thing for corporate, the corporate world. But we had a cassette player in the car, and I remember we pulled off the road somewhere, who knows where, on the way to San Diego. And we found a record store, a place that sold cassettes. And the cassette I remember the most that we bought, we played over and over again. And I hadn't picked up the LP yet, but that's this record, The Clash. Combat Rock, as I recall, is the Clash's biggest selling record. Of course, Straight to Hell, Know Your Rights, Should I Stay or Should I Go was a huge hit all over the radio and on video on MTV. Rock the Casbah as well, Straight to Hell Boy. Love this record. There's a lot of soul in this record. And this is, I believe, the last record Mick Jones was on before his departure. Allen Ginsberg is on this record. So I remember when Allen Ginsberg, I think it was, is it Inoculated City or Ghetto Defendant, came up, Randy just freaked out, was going crazy. And so we're in San Diego, and I didn't know San Diego really well. I used to go with my parents down there. We went to some punk club that night in the van, and Randy got so shit-faced the night before. We had to get up at 5 a.m. and set up his stuff. So I had to cover for him, set all the mixing boards up for the audio, set everything up. I think he finally showed up around 10 a.m. That's a memory you have, a memory of 1982, The Clash, and Randy setting up audio visual. A few records that I would get in 1982. X's Under the Big Black Sun. I'd been a fan since their first album that was produced by Ray Manzarek. And this record came out in 1982, and it's a really good record. All the records are good, so I suggest them. Every time they'd come to California or come to San Francisco, I'd go see them. LA band, saw them in LA. I think at Madame Wong's once, saw them in San Francisco in the Buhay Gardens, at the Stone, and any club. Every time they came, they were one of the bands I would see pretty much every time, so I probably saw them 5 or 6 times. There was a lot of indie labels popping up since obviously the late 70s that are new wave and punk, and a label that started in San Francisco was 415 Records. It was started by Howie Klein and Chris Knabb. Howie Klein started doing radio shows on the college station KUSF, and then actually KSAN first. They were one of the first punk shows in the country, playing punk shows in the late 70s. They had a shift on KSAN, Chris Knabb and Howie Klein. Howie Klein started a label, 415 Records. This is actually a comp Howie Klein put together, and some people from KSAN Radio and KUSF 415 Music. This actually came out in 1980, so it's a little before this video of 1982. But it shows these sort of San Francisco Bay Area bands: Joe Allen and the Shapes, the Donuts, the Offs, the Mutants, the Ready Mades, Sudden Fun, SVT, Symptoms, 391 times 5, and the VIPs. So I would see these bands all over San Francisco and the Bay Area, all through the early 80s. And one of the bands he signed was Translator. They worked out a deal a few years later with Columbia, so Columbia had first refusal for 415 artists, which means they could put out some of they had first dibs on putting out the records, and they put out, I think, 3 or 4 records by Translator. Kind of a power pop band, had a really great sound. I love this record. This is called Heartbeats and Triggers. 2 songs got a lot of play in the Bay Area: Everywhere That I'm Not and Everywhere. And it's very harmony vocals, very catchy. Another band at the time was all over the airways in the local scene was Romeo Void. I don't think they put out a record in '82, but they were around all the time. Deborah Isle was the lead singer of that. You probably know them from You Might Like Me Better If We Slept Together, Never Say Never. But that whole scene was really good. And these bands were not only playing at the clubs, they were playing house parties. So you go to these, after-hour parties, and bands would be playing, and Translator and Romeo Void and those kind of bands would be all around. Another band that I saw twice that came through, which was very unique at the time, and that was the Meat Puppets. And they came through San Francisco. I saw them twice, about, I think, 2 or 3 times. And this is their 1982 record. They're still together, and they do great stuff. 1982 Meat Puppets. Of course, another LA band that had hit huge on their first album. Started as a punk band, became a very power pop, slick band, but in a good way, and that's the Go-Go's. Go-Go's Vacation. This record is almost as good as their debut. Of course, the song Vacation was the hit off this record, the initial single. Maybe the first one I would give the advantage because it came out of nowhere. But one of the great girl groups, one of the great all-women groups, again, started as a punk group. And of course, groups like the Bangles would follow and be as popular, and in some ways more popular for a while on that. The whole scene was crazy, and my buddy Brooks and I, it's funny, Kathy didn't want to go to the punk clubs for me. There were too, I don't think they were not posh enough. That's why this really didn't work. There are other reasons why it didn't work. But Brooks and I one night went to a club called The Stone on Broadway. Later became, I think it was a strip club, then it was not a strip club, then it was a strip club again. The Stone, I think, was an offshoot of the people that owned clubs in Berkeley called the Keystone. And they also, Keystone Corner, which was a jazz club in San Francisco, but that was a total separate ownership. So The Stone on Broadway, right where all the strip clubs were, Carol Doda's, all those strip clubs, and then you'd have The Stone. There were a couple of clubs that switched and started doing punk shows also. Cross street from The Stone was the fabulous Mabuhay Gardens that started in the late 70s. That's the Fab Mab, which was a Filipino restaurant that became a punk club that I went to many times. But The Stone, I saw XTC at The Stone. I saw James Brown at The Stone. And of course, one night Brooks and I went to see this group at The Stone, the Plasmatics. Wendy O. Williams, electric tape covering her nipples, chainsaw. It was hysterical. The first 2 records, I got rid of them for a while, and I recently got them back from Chris, who did a record collection buy here, and bought these from him, I think last year or the year before, because I wanted these in my collection because they have a soft spot in my heart, if that makes any sense. Debauchery, loud, angry, hysterical, almost campy in a way. And of course, live, they were so campy and so great. That was one of those shows I remember after that. Brooks and I, there was literally a group of 20 people that we didn't even know, walked out of the club, and someone said, hey, there's a party in North Beach down on Bay Street. So we walked to this sort of semi-mid-rise apartment building like it was a bunker type building. I remember very Bauhaus architecture, probably built in the 1960s, and it was a 10th floor looking beautifully over the bay towards Alcatraz, Ghirardelli Square. I just remember Brooks and I going to that party, just following this group of people. We had no idea who they were after this Plasmatics show. So it was pretty hysterical. Of course, another band that put out this amazing live album of the Talking Heads. The name of the band is the Talking Heads, and this is a double album, an incredibly live album that goes from their sort of intimate quartet to their full-blown African soulful mix sound. I saw them the first time at the boarding house in, I guess, 77, when their first album came out, when they were just minimal. Psycho Killer came out, and I was blown away. I hadn't really heard anything quite like that. Art rock, college rock, early, but we didn't call this stuff that then. Of course, David Byrne brings in bass players, more rhythm, more percussion. You all know their later records. This is a fabulous record, one of the better live albums that I know, especially one of the better albums in the 1980s. Recorded really well, beautifully produced. Now, the Jam. The UK groups were coming still into San Francisco. Of course, everyone came to San Francisco. It was really a great hotbed for music. So I would see these bands in clubs and medium-sized halls. I did see them, and I can't remember if it was the Warfield where I saw the Jam around, it was before this record came out, so it might have been 1980 or something. But The Gift, one of my favorite Jam albums, Paul Weller. You know, I did get a little into the Style Council, but I have Paul Weller's solo albums. A friend of mine last year gave me his entire collection because he found originals, and he gave me the entire catalog of Paul Weller's solo records. They don't quite move me. I don't know what it is. I know he's really huge and or pretty big in the UK. He's got a cult following in America. And of course, as I said a few minutes ago, another band I saw at the Stone was XTC, one of their few American tours, because Andy Partridge is infamous for being afraid of performing and traveling. But this is an incredible album. I can't remember if I saw him in 81, 82, or 83, whatever the last tour was. And again, it was at the Stone on Broadway. This is an amazing record, Ball and Chain, but one of the great singles they ever made was Senses Working Overtime. An amazing production, amazing song. Melt the Guns is great, and just a beautiful artistic cover. XTC, Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding. A record that was all over the radio was the Celtic Soul Brothers, Tour-Raye, by Kevin Rowland and Dexy's Midnight Runners. You know, kind of if Van Morris had gone more punk and new wave, he would have been doing this. In fact, they do Jackie Wilson Said, which is the great opening track that Van Morrison does on his album, St. Dominic's Preview. Come On Eileen was a huge hit. Again, another great MTV song. I'd gone to England and got some imports. This is an import of a great record I got, Psychedelic Furs record, Forever Now. This is the UK cover, which has a huge poster of this, and I'm not gonna pull it out because it's so massive, with a sticker. I think this kicks ass over the American version. Of course, as President Gas, which is a great song, Love My Way, Forever Now. This might be my favorite album by the Psychedelic Furs. Saw them when they came through San Francisco as well, but got into these groups. You know, these groups would play, and I would go to a club also called the I-Beam and see artists like Echo and the Bunnymen and The Cure, and it was a club that had been a gay disco, and they started doing new wave bands and punk shows there. I even saw later years Pearl Jam there. So great to see them in this kind of club scenario before these bands really broke. Wonderful packaging, very Dayglow psychedelic packaging. Psychedelic Furs were great. I don't know if they get as much love as they should, but of course, being on, songs like Pretty in Pink, a whole movie named after one of their songs, and the John Hughes films that used a lot of this great music. John Hughes is obviously probably one of the greatest proponents of new wave and bands like the Smiths and Psychedelic Furs and Kate Bush in the 1980s that really got these bands more airplay in America. Another band in the new wave world, Susie and the Banshees, saw them come through here. Now this is the 1981 comp. I don't have anything from 82, but this is kind of a cool record. But I saw them in this year when they came through, so I'm throwing it in there. And same with this, another comp of a band, Bauhaus, important post-punk band that I saw around these times as well. Relationships are complicated, and I've always wanted to share my loves with my friends. And what I mean is just have a group of friends getting together, hanging out, and it's been pretty good on most occasions. This situation, Kathy and I, in a way, looking back on it, I really retreated for a while from my friends, especially in the fall and after the summer of 1982. Now, it kind of, as I recall, commenced around the time my book came out. David and I we had negotiated with a publisher, or excuse me, with a distributor called Book People out of Berkeley, who distributed our book. And we had a book party at a place called the Southern Exposure Gallery, which is this art gallery in the Inner Mission district of San Francisco, which was kind of an off the beat area, which was really a cool area. The irony was, in 1991, I'd actually buy my first house about 5 blocks from this gallery. I didn't know that area at the time, and it became such an amazing, cool area, cafes and bars and art galleries and things. And I got in when it was a little sketchy, but I always liked that area, flat area, semi-industrial and then residential. It was really kind of a cool mix. And we ended up having our book party there in June of 1982. The book is The Beatles England. This is the edition that came out. What it is, it's a travel guide of Beatles sites in England. There were no Beatle tour books. There was no sites of travel and tourism for the Beatles. Liverpool had nothing. London had nothing. You go to the Liverpool Tourist Bureau and they'd say, oh, there's nothing here to see. So we did a book ourselves because it's a book that we wish we had when I first went to England in 1978 and David went in 1979. So we did this book and we had a fabulous book party. There's going to be some photographs from that party coming up, included in that little pictorial, some pictures of Kathy and I in our tempestuous relationship. What's great about this, we did a limited edition of 1,000 copies of a hardcover, which are all sold out. My friend Brooks did this great author picture. Thank you, Brooks, for taking that picture. Look at all that meat we barbecued. I don't even think we could barbecue it. I think it was too rank because it was left out so long when we took the picture. But we had a UK edition. There was Doubleday. Columbus Books did an edition in the UK. Sony did this edition in Japan. So it was a really exciting time. Quality Paperback Book Club did an edition. We had a great time. We ended up selling, with 2 printings, almost 40,000 copies, which is a lot for an indie book like this. But all the travel sites in London, in Liverpool, and a day tripping section that covers Hamburg and West Malling Airfield, where they filmed Magical Mystery Tour, and just around. So we did a promo postcard. It's a picture that I took at Strawberry Fields in Liverpool. And we even had promo buttons. Because this is the 80s, buttons were big. Buttons were big in the 60s, 70s, 80s. What am I talking about? They were really cool. But that party, we had such a great time. We were drinking, we were snorting, we were traveling around also. But here is the video.
Thinking about the times you drove in my car, thinking that I might have drove you too far, and I'm thinking of the love that you laid on my table. I told you not to wander around in the dark. I told you about the swans that they live in the park. Then I told you about our kid, now he's married to Mabel. Yes, I told you that the light goes up and down. Don't you notice how the wheel goes round? And you'd better pick yourself up from the ground before they bring the curtain down. Yes, before they bring the curtain down.
Also part of our promotions, David and I went around doing book tours. We went to Chicago, and what we did is we timed our book tours to go to Beatlefest. If you don't know, that Beatlefest, now called the Fest for Beatle fans, they're produced by Mark Lapidus. I think they started in the 70s, and they had a couple in San Francisco, but the main cities they did for years was Los Angeles, mostly initially at the Bonaventure Hotel downtown LA, those Portman designed spiral towers downtown. They did them in Meadowlands in New Jersey at a hotel that doesn't exist anymore. That's the New York Beatlefest. And they did it in Chicago, downtown Chicago. And sometime by the airport, they would mix and match places where they had these fests. David and I would go to a lot of them to promote our book. We'd have a table, we'd do a slideshow. We had a great time. And in 1982, I'm admitting this now, and I don't know if the statute of limitations have gone out. Every time we had a Beatle weekend, we would get in trade for doing our slideshow, a free room at the hotel, and David and I would bring a gram of cocaine. However, one time there was a situation, and that was the last time either of us snorted cocaine. It scared the shit out of us, so there you go. One of the times was really a fun situation, and at the Bonaventure Hotel, the guest that year, one of the guests that year, in fact, I think it was 81 and 82 and 83 he was there, was Harry Nilsson. Nilsson, everybody's talking about me. Friend of John Lennon's, who in 73-4 was part of the Lost Weekend. That was the Lost Year with John Lennon and Keith Moon, Harry Nilsson. Drinking, debauchery, drugs, and Harry Nilsson was extremely devastated, like we all were after John Lennon was shot. So he would come to the these Beatlefest, and he would have like sign autographs, and he would be there promoting anti-gun violence and handgun restrictions, handgun bans. And one night, or actually one afternoon in between things, I don't know how, we had got to know him a little bit because they'd have these after-hour parties each night, and he was shit-faced. So Harry Nilsson and David and I spoke in the lobby bar of the Bonaventure Hotel for at least an hour and a half. And in that time, he would drink an entire bottle of brandy. Incredible stories, an amazing time. It's so sad how he ravaged his voice, and I mean, he had this golden voice, and he became this just the singing was terrible. He had done the song with John Lennon that John Lennon produced called Pussycats, which it's grown on me for years, and that was in the 70s, but his voice just ravaged. The version of Many Rivers to Cross is frightening and gorgeous at the same time, if that makes any sense. But I do have this signed autograph from Harry Nilsson from 1982. So I keep it in this great album, Son of Schmielsen. Obviously, this record's from the 70s. What a great Richard Perry produced album. Nilsson Schmielsen and Son of Schmielsen are fantastically, beautifully, wonderfully beautiful records. This is not from 82, but here it is, En Handgun Violence. Now, as I said, Harry Nilsson was there, and I had a great experience with him, but it's sort of sweet to have this now after all these years. To Norman with Nilsson. Just a few more albums from 1982. Elvis Costello was putting out albums consistently, and I was hooked on Elvis. There was a period of time, though, that Elvis didn't get a lot of love. He wasn't getting a lot of airplay, and Imperial Bedroom has grown on me. I think a lot of his records have grown in stature over the decades. This is one that didn't get a lot of love. Has the song Town Crier, which is a beautiful song, and Man at a Time. But this wasn't really considered a really great album at the time and a popular album. He was getting more produced. He lost his angry young man innocence in a way. But his songwriting was getting really intricate and really beautiful. So I've grown onto these 80s albums quite a bit over the decades. And also, same with Nick Lowe. He kept putting out albums, great voice. His power pop sheen had disappeared. He was doing these albums with a little more, with more ballads on them. Still somewhat power pop. This is Nick the Knife. Nick Lowe, still an artist that I really like. He's become, to me, a quintessential balladeer over the years. Love Nick Lowe. And another of the whole angry young man new wave thing that really had changed, and some people didn't get this album at the time, and again, this one I think has grown in stature, and that's Joe Jackson's Night and Day. Someone who started out doing like new wave stuff in, was it 1977, 78 with Look Sharp, puts out a series of jazz-based, piano-based albums, and Night and Day is definitely one of them. Steppin' Out is really a great, great single and a great song. So this album, I know it's gotten analog productions, I think, or it's gotten audiophile treatment. It's a really good record. It's a mature record, and I think a lot of people didn't expect it in 1982 and were still looking for that out there. And to some people, I think he was getting more in the mainstream, but it's not really a mainstream album, but it's a good jazz pop record and an incredibly recorded record. Now, here's a trio of albums. Only one came out in 1982, but to me, I wanted to show these because they fit together perfectly. And these are, it starts out with the 1982 album of King Crimson, Beat. This is a different incarnation completely of King Crimson. This is when Adrian Blue became their guitarist and lead vocalist. Robert Fripp, of course, continues on his Frippatronics and organ and guitar. The great Tony Levin on stick bass, and Bill Bruford on drums, who had been with them for quite a while already. But the new inclusion of Adrian Blue and Tony Levin made it a totally different sounding band. The songs were shorter, tighter, more post-punk in a way, new wave post-punk, and incredible. This is my favorite of the three records, and it's got a great song, Neil, Jack, and Me, of course, about Neil Cassidy, Jack Kerouac, and me. Not Mazzy, but me. Heartbeat. Adrian Blue's vocalists are stupendous, but these are the three records, and they're such a great trilogy of records. 3 of a Perfect Pair and Discipline. All 3 are, records that I think are really important for fans of King Crimson, and especially the 80s version of King Crimson. I would recommend this one out of all 3. It's a beautiful record. I love the matching stylings of this record. And this is the time when I was listening to this stuff, I was listening to all this kind of music, and Kathy was going in the more dancey thing. I remember going to these clubs. I remember like Shock the Monkey by Peter Gabriel playing in a club, and always dancing to Shock the Monkey with Kathy. It was like, dance clubs were the big thing also. Drug-fueled dance clubs and of alcohol and loud disco music, but new wavy punk. Obviously the whole New Order stuff was happening still, or the Manchester scene a little bit. But I remember the record that Kathy used to play all the time. And I'm not showing it here because I don't believe it came out in '82. But as a Human League, Don't You Want Me Baby, she would play that record all the time. I don't know about the women in your life, but most of the women that I dated, they latch on to 1 or 2 or 3 records, and they play those records all the time. Now, this is not a criticism, it's just a fact looking back and the memories I have with these situations. So Human League is my Kathy record. I have that record, but I'm not showing it in this video. Have a little palate cleanser. I'm just going to show some Beatles just because they did put out sort of albums in 1982. Terrible comp, real music, movies, movie music. I mean, not that the records, the songs are always great. Of course, Hard Day's Night, Should Have Known Better, Help, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, Magical Mystery Tour, Yellow Submarine, Get Back, Long and Winding Road. Look at that cover. Roy Kahara, the art director at Capitol at this point. I think he was still the art director here. Yep. Don't like it, sorry. But, as a Beatle collector. But then there's a couple of solo albums. Now, this record didn't get a lot of love either. Gone Tropo by George Harrison. But my buddy Hale at Warner Brothers would always get me promos of their records. I did buy them. I think I have 2 copies of it. This was a Quiax, a pressing feature that mostly Warner Brothers and Geffen, the WIA groups, used. I don't know if it was a vinyl compound limited edition pressing. They did a limited edition, and these are the early pressings. One might compare them to white label promos. They sound excellent. A lot of people think now, looking on Paul McCartney's album the last couple of years, Egypt Station has a similar type of artwork. This is a very Hawaiian record. Wake Up My Love, Gone Tropo, Circles, which was an earlier song that he kind of brought back. But George Harrison can't do a video of Beatle Connection without doing it. Geffen Records, of course, the first comp, post John's death comp. They put out, this is actually a really, really nice comp. It's John Lennon collection, so it includes a lot of songs from Double Fantasy, plus a lot of his great hits and singles like Instant Karma, Power to the People, Give Peace a Chance, Love, Imagine, Jealous Guy, plus I think most of the songs except for his two of his songs from Double Fantasy. And then Beatle Connection, in a way it's her rebirth album. Yoko Ono had put out Season a Glass in 1981. That was her cry out of help, of sadness album with John Lennon's glasses on the cover. And this is It's All Right, where I think she's starting to come out. Beautiful picture of the late John and Yoko and Sean. I think the last 50 years as a prelude to my life, Yoko Ono. Never Say Goodbye, and there's a great long 12-inch mix of that song, which is really incredible. It's All Right, Wake Up, Let the Tears Dry, Dream Love, I See Rainbows, Tomorrow May Never Come, Loneliness. So she's kind of coming back. I'm a big Yoko fan. I think this is a really wonderful record, and it came out in 1982. She had switched to Polygram from Geffen. And one of the most important records, and I mean important because it was a change up totally, and that's Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. It's the cassette he did almost as demos, and they put it out just as is. It's an introspective record. It's about America. It's highway patrolman, Atlantic City, used cars, open all night, my father's house. Gorgeous record. And of course, 2 years later, he would do something completely opposite and do the 1984 record back in the USA and have his biggest hit of his career pretty much. But Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, a very important record. I was still following the whole Springsteen thing. I would go see him live any chance I got. Just a few more. A good album, Ry Cooder's Slide Area. A very tempestuous political record by the great Warren Zevon, The Envoy. This didn't get love at all, really, but the song The Envoy is really, really a great song. Warren Zevon has always been entrenched not only in intense music in terms of lyrically about the LA scene, about the dark underbelly of Los Angeles. He's been in sort of political, social, geographic science, like political science. And the song The Envoy is about, you know, the intrigue in the Middle East. Kind of the bad boy of LA. Nuclear arms in the Middle East, Israel attacking the Iraqis, the Syrians are mad at Lebanese, and Baghdad does whatever she please. Looks like another threat to world peace from The Envoy. There's also some fun songs like the Hula Hula Boys, Jesus Mentioned, Looking for the Next Best Thing, Charlie's Medicine, Ain't That Pretty at All, which is almost like a punk song. So Warren Zevon can go from the LA 70s, you know, Fleetwood Mac-like rock in his own way, to the intense, loud, bombastic stuff, and he never fails. And I love this record, The Envoy, Warren Zevon. Power pop was still happening and growing, and Marshall Crenshaw, his solo debut, one of the great power pop solo debuts of all time. Someday, Someway was a huge hit. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. It was a huge cult hit, got a lot of radio airplay, didn't really chart big. I got into him because I saw him in New York. He was on Broadway as one of the original members of Beatlemania on Broadway. I think he played the John Lennon part in Beatlemania. Not the Beatles, but an incredible simulation. Of course, Love Over Gold, Dire Straits. It's a Mo-Fi edition. I didn't love this record at the time. It's not one of my favorites, but you know, people go crazy over this record. I still think their first record is their best. Let's go with this record. What the fuck, Neil Young? Neil Young doing this whole electronic, just a suicidal career of records recording for Geffen Records, and he does this electronic thing. Quaint record? No. Great record? No. If you're a Neil Young fan, do you need this? Probably. Electronica? What the fuck, Neil? Neil Young goes his own way, and it's great. I'm gonna just close out with two records that have become like audiophile classics. The interesting thing about the new wave punk, post-punk, UK, groups like the Plasmatics and X and everything, they were a whole different scene is these two records. And I'm showing them together because they become huge records in the audiophile world, of different editions coming out, whether it's Mobile Fidelity or whoever's pressing these. And of course, it's a really great recorded record, Night Flight. If you can't have Steely Dan, you have a great soul record by Donald Fagen. This was all over MTV with the song IGY, which was a great animated sort of post-nuclear underground bunker animation record. Ruby Baby, which is a cover song, but this is a very wonderful record. It didn't jive with some of the punk stuff and post-punk stuff going on, so some people, there was a little bit of a yin yang of being into the slick stuff and being the other stuff. And of course, this became probably their most popular record, Avalon by Roxy Music, and their slickest record, and one of their, probably their biggest hit record. More Than This, Avalon, India, The Main Thing. It's an incredibly recorded record. Again, it's so slick and so beautiful. A lot of people who were into the earlier Roxy music, that was the art rock and the Brian Eno, and then a few records after that, sort of got turned off to this. I mean, right after Siren came out. But I love this record. This is one of those records, though, I couldn't listen to for 20 years because everywhere you go, they'd be playing Roxy Music, Avalon. So that's it. So this is Memories of a Vinyl Junkie, 1982. I mean, another great year for music. Again, 82 really had that kind of crossover stuff with bands holding on from the 80s. Some were doing really well. Some didn't know what to do in the 80s. You know, some started getting more into the 80s, started doing that synthetic drum sound that is so dated here. This is a little before that, or as it was happening. So it wasn't as tragic, in my opinion, as it would get in the next subsequent years. So thank you for watching. There's a whole playlist of more of these videos. Mazzy loves you, and thank you so much, everyone out there in YouTube land.